This lecture will look at photography leaves the studio, as we talked about the early days of photography, how over a period of time that there were better advancements in cameras and better with the film and just the process in general. So now we're going to start looking when photographers started to leave the studio and do things outside of a studio setting. Here's an example of some American photographers, Southworth and Hawes and Niagara Falls. So one of the early things was that governments wanting to record what's out there. What do we have in our country? What buildings? What monuments? These are things that we discussed a little bit before. And in France, one of the things with photography was to start recording the landmarks, start recording all the different buildings that we have. So here's Gustave Le Gray, central portal of the Church of Saint Jacques. And again, it's just, recording these landmarks. At the same time, they might, take some artistic freedom with some of the stuff that they're doing, such as the Le Gray's seascape. Elsewhere in the painting world, where we're getting into the sublime, mainly up in England, and as well as some of the romantic and painters in France. So sort of this nature at awe, the awe-inspiring imagery that we have here. Also, one of the first collage by Le Gray that we've looked at before, especially if you remember Henry Robinson and his use of photography of cutting up negatives and putting them back together to create a whole new type of image that it's a little more mimicking painting. Another image by Le Gray, The Great Wave. One of the other things going on in the art world again is man coming into nature. How is man interfering with nature? How is man trying to conquer nature? So here we can see in the background essentially a jetty coming out to help control the sea, help to control the waves. Henry Lassique, again, sort of, man coming into the landscape, man taking over. How is, man, these man-made objects in this landscape, in this case, in a seascape. Another one of his Lassique's images, Tower of Kings at Reims. And again, it's just, recording the monumental architectural forms, these massive Gothic cathedrals, getting up there and being able to show the public what is up there. Most of the times these areas are restricted, so you're not allowed to go up and see them. Now finally people have a chance to see all of the finer details and all the little sculptures that are all over these massive cathedrals that either you can't see because it's restricted access or it's just, very far up. Here we have Charles Negri, again, documenting and recording in his Laporte de Nice view panoramique, a panoramic image of a port in Nice, France. What does Nice look like? And here is his take, again, on images of Notre Dame. One of the things to point out is the gargoyles that we see, and if you've seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Disney animated movie, One of the things to point out is that during the original constructions of these cathedrals, these gargoyles were not included. They were actually added, shortly before Negri would have taken this image. And one of the things that happen, in the larger world of art was sort of this return to medieval styles, looking back at what was going on during the Gothic period and during the Romanesque period. What were we doing during the Middle Ages? So looking back at one's own past in a way, as opposed to the neoclassical and romanticism that are dominating the painting and the other parts of the art world. They're looking at these far off distant places. Neoclassical looking at ancient Greece and ancient Rome, while romanticism starts to look at more contemporary settings, but there's still these far off places that are areas that are part of the French Empire. These things and events going on in northern Africa. At the same time, they start looking at their own past as well. And part of that, looking at these cathedrals and the gargoyles that we see here, are added to it. They decide to add these more decorative details to the churches. When you get into Christian architecture and all that, the churches are never really finished in a way, and that they're always being added to. So here's an example of these gargoyles being added to help sort of keep them modern and keep sort of a current interest with the churches. Now, Frederick Scott Archer, he comes up with the ambrotype. And again, looking at processes and the chemistry of things going on, he comes up with a process that, it's actually much better process than some of the ones that are out there. It's always, again, trying to find a quicker developing, especially a exposure time, lessen the exposure time, having a image that has much more detail to it, being able to capture more detail, in this case, a photo of Archer himself. And part of what he did was taking his process and sort of making it freely available. The unfortunate thing about this was, again, that we talked about, Daguerre and his sort of monopoly of everything, taking things over, forcing people out. Unfortunately, that's what happened to Archer, is that while his method was far superior in detail, because of sharing it freely, he is essentially went bankrupt. Now looking at some of the images from Europe and United States. Legray, again, we've looked at before. Again, he's going out and capturing the aqueduct, taking note of what is out there. Aqueducts all over Europe made by the Romans. So, of course, France wants to record and document what they have, their sites of antiquity. And with the May Bridge, as you can see here, it's a Pacific Railroad Topographic Survey expedition. He's going out, what is out there that railroads need to deal with? What type of bridges might we have to have? What type of mountains do we have to move around? Where's the railroad going and what could be interfering with the railroad that we would need to be aware of so we have the equipment to do it and to take care of it. And so, with the idea of that, the Manifest Destiny in 1840, it comes about in the United States. Here, that idea by John Gast, American Progress, 1872, as we can see the Americans migrating westward. Manifest Destiny, for those not familiar, was basically this idea it's our God-given right to take over the rest of the American continent. We have this right to go in and take over the lands and further push our civilization westward. So getting into topographic photographers, again, photographers hired to go out and photograph the American West to show people what's out there. Part of learning what's out there, learning what's all in our country, what are these things that we're not aware of, partly for the railroads wanting to move out, further the expansion of the West. At the same time, just general curiosity of what is out there, what all is in our country. So as you can see, here the William Henry Jackson using a Mammoth plate camera. As I discussed before, that here he has, about an 11 by 14 camera, so that the negative is an 11 by 14. These massive, massive cameras. And what you can do with these massive negatives is record a massive amount of visual information. Briefly talking about digital versus film before, or digital is slowly creeping up, but for a digital camera to be able to capture the same amount of information like an 11 by 14 would just be so ridiculously expensive that no one could really afford something like that. So some of his other images, here we have the upper Twin Lakes of Colorado. Carlton Watkins, 3 views from Sentinel Dome in Yosemite. So probably a little more with what is out there, what can we see, what's in our country that we can go out and experience and view. Part of what's going on with this expansion westward is taking the railroad to new and further places, so that these places that were, the idea of far off places that you would never get to see, slowly these places are becoming easier to get to with steam travel, with taking trains out. You don't have to rely on the wagon trains anymore. We have the trains, going across the country that one can take. Another Carlton Watkins, again, the railroad, part of the survey that would have taken place to build the railroads. Timothy O'Sullivan, again, what's out there? What is life like for people in the Carson Desert? How do you get across the Carson Desert? What are railroad companies going to have to deal with? Or do we just find a different way around this area? At the same time, O'Sullivan, capturing and documenting what is out there. Some of the ancient ruins in the Canyon de Chile. capturing these ruins of some of the Puebloans. Here we have the Edward May Bridge, the domes of Mercedes River and Yosemite Valley. Looked at it before briefly. He was part of the expedition team going out photographing areas where the railroads were being built. So, are they going to have to span a gorge? Obviously, you have to cross a river. Where would be the best place to cross this river that they would be able to get from these photographs? Another contribution Maybridge adds, the horse in motion, which I believe we talked briefly before. Essentially, this is how motion pictures start. Two gentlemen had a bet on whether or not a horse at a full gallop, all four hooves were on the ground at one time. One gentleman arguing, since the horse is running so fast, it's too hard to see, but he claimed that all four hooves have to be on the ground at the same time. But of course, we know that's not the case. Thanks to Maybridge, to help settle this bet, one of the men was a horse owner, stable owner. He owned a lot of horses already, so he got one of his horses and a jockey, and they borrowed a track to run this horse around, and they asked Maybridge come out, and he set up a series of white sheets with a series of cameras with tripwires. So basically, as they're running the horse around this track, by the time it gets to this section of the track where Maybridge has everything all set up with the cameras and the white backdrop, the horse would be at a full gallop, running through, tripping all the tripwires. And basically, as you can see, this is the beginning of the motion picture industry. That from this bet spawns a whole new industry of film and motion picture. And of course, unfortunately, that bet cost someone, I believe, is around like $13 million in today's money. So that's it for this short lecture. Be sure to see the next lecture where we get into more of typography and get into photographers in documenting war.